Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Donc cet exposé autour notamment de la question du
This
modèle économique
presentation about the business model, well, here I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you. I won't have so many original things to say. It's a topic that's been discussed at length in every forum, but we talk about it so much because we haven't yet found the silver bullet that will allow the news and media world to get out of the apparent crisis that it's in currently, or so it seems. It's true that the issue of the business model, what business model for the future, the business model crisis, the obsolescence of some models, those are so many topics that have become chestnuts in this business, as we say. But with the experience that I've acquired as CEO of AFP and with regular and daily meetings with the over 4,000 clients of AFP throughout the world. However, I think that inside the agency we have been thinking long and hard about this issue, and this is what I would like to share with you today in Montpellier. First thing that's obvious and first paradox, of course, there has never been so much news that's consumed around the world with a breakthrough that has been essential in the last few years. We've gone through a fairly well segmented mode of consumption that was well organized so that you started consuming news with the radio in the morning, and then possibly you would read a newspaper in public transport, and then possibly you would chit-chat about the news with your colleagues at work, what you heard on the radio or read in the papers, and then you would all watch the evening news on television. So you could go from one media to the other, but in a fairly well segmented and organized fashion with a few guiding threads that were found throughout the day. This model has really completely been shattered in the last few years with two major factors. First, the rise of 24-hour news channels and radio stations that have really raised the level of overall production of news and news dissemination, and of course social media. Now everyone with their smartphones or tablets are part of a news flow. So we've gone from a fairly well segmented logic to a permanent flow logic. So you are bombarded with news 24/7, and that's why news are really ever so commonplace. And it seems that news has lost its economic value because the number of players or the number of relays of news, you need to distinguish from those who produce news and those who simply relay it or transmit it. Because of social media. So everyone in their own ways, well, this is the debate about citizen journalism, but the number of players and creators of news has really mushroomed. We've gone from 1 to 1,000 to 1 to 10,000. There's really, it's now really a mass media. There's so many people creating news, transferring it, retweeting, and so on. And the issue of the value of news, how it's sourced, how it's disseminated, and who is going to be compensated for that. This is a very obvious problem, and so there's a lot of price deflation. I can see that every day at AFP. Trying to retain value for a news feed is something that's very difficult simply because of competition or the impoverishment of our clients. And it's probably because our clients are poorer than more than because of competition. The issue of the economic value of news has never been so severe in such a deflationary situation. And there's one last thing that I wanted to remind you of before I forged ahead with my presentation. The economic system is that the end consumer of news has never really paid for the price of the service that they access news. They've never paid for it. There was always intervention to reduce the price of information, the price of news, to make it affordable and accessible. That went through the arrival of advertising, which reduced the unit cost of newspapers in print media, which went from gazettes to mass newspapers. So the price of a newspaper is not the economic production and dissemination cost of a newspaper. The TV license fee in France was created after the Second World War to finance the major public services, France Television and the BBC, also RAI, BBC in the UK, RAI in Italy, and so on. This has made it possible to offer near free news for consumers. And very quickly, there's another sector that I'm more interested in, because that's the one I'm in right now, the pooling of collection costs from press agencies. Because very quickly, in order to have access to original, global, diversified, comprehensive, exhaustive, and reliable news, in the 19th century, newspapers got together with various modalities, but they coalesced around press agencies, which are a way to pool news collections so that everyone can have access to news that in isolation they would have never been able to produce. So pooling collection costs is really the bedrock of and the reason for being for press agencies. It's still the idea behind the whole ecosystem. And this is how newspapers, radio stations, and TV channels can have access 24 hours a day in real time to news from all around the planet. Right now, globally, there are 3 or 4 main press agencies, 3 to 4. Well, there's AP, Associated Press, Reuters, which has become US-Canadian, left its historical base from London. There's AFP. Each of them has specific statuses, but now I'm talking about the 4th one that we're not really taking care of, the Chinese, paying enough attention to the Chinese press agency, which has a fairly strong and aggressive global strategy. For instance, this Chinese press agency has a regional bureau covering Latin America with over 150 Mexican journalists in Mexico. And yesterday I was invited for the inauguration of the gallery that they're opening on Faubourg Saint-Honoré, 200 meters from the French presidential palace. It's a gallery with 200 photos, and 2 years ago they led a major advertising campaign in Times Square at the heart of the media planet, explaining that they were our new media partner. So they are competing with us directly because prices and for them and the economic profitability levels are not exactly the same as ours. And since I think that there will be very few reasons why this deflationary effects on competitive prices should disappear. There's less and less consumption of that, and so what about the sustainability of the media market? Now, should we despair? What are the economic challenges also? The challenge is to bring value, economic value, back into the news world. There are two ways to go about it. Either you create value around news, or you see things in a more comprehensive fashion and you consider that value is poorly distributed in the overall internet sector. Well, I think it's a bit of both. It's not either or. The situation is complex enough for us to be able to actuate various levers. There's just not just one main lever, there are many levers. So the first thing when I'm talking overall to journalists is that you need to do real journalism. You need to produce news. Because in fact, the economic crisis linked to the value of news is because you can less and less distinguish news from the overall buzz, and so you need to recreate exclusives, you need to make your news stand apart, you need to really differentiate your news. On the web and on Twitter, locating really news is something that's very difficult. News is focusing again on just a few sources, and you can see that sources remain extremely stable. This means that the feeling that there's more and more news than in the past is simply due to the echo produced by social media, the rise of the websites of the various newspapers. Now part of the newsrooms have been shifted to the internet in all sectors, but there's a lot of redundancy in that. It's really visible on the internet to the extreme. You can see that on the web, raw news, as it were, the main issuers of news globally have remained stable. So for a press agency, it's fairly reassuring, although that raises different issues. But it all goes to show that since sources remain serious and reliable, that's why they still have a very important position. A few years ago, when I joined AFP, there was a debate about the possible death of press agencies. Maybe they were dinosaurs that were part of a long-gone world. Well, we were Jurassic Park before our time, really. But no, not really. You can see that the number of clients for AFP is only growing. It is. The number is growing, but the value of each individual contract is going down. The value of each contract linked to what I was saying is going down because of competition. We have smaller clients, or main clients are facing economic difficulties, but the number of clients is rising. So that shows that the need for an agency as the originator of news involved in the editorial process is something essential. Only the real issue that's also true for agency is to recreate exclusives, differentiators. For instance, for AFP, we cater to global markets. Our international turnover is 55%. We have more clients abroad than in France, and our turnover is now mostly generated abroad, and this trend will only continue. Only here we're talking about markets where the real differentiator between us and AP and Reuters is that we have a strategic positioning. We have to say that, well, we're doing the same as them. You are guaranteed to get the same thing about what's going on in Chile, in Latin America, North America, in Vietnam. And here I'd like to say hello to my Vietnamese colleague. Well, you will get it from AFP as you get it from the others, but how are we different? For us, that's a real internal problem. In-house, we need to do the same thing, but we also need to have areas of excellence and differentiators. This is because we choose different angles, different coverage, and I think this is really the essential thing. The second thing that we need to pay extreme attention to has to do the way we write our news. We need to pay more attention to the portability of our content, to provide more continuity in the way our news is consumed. Press agencies are not subject to the debate that the more traditional media are faced with. Are we working for print or for the web? Actually, press agencies are really newswires. They were Twitter before Twitter even existed. This is what the public are discovering with Twitter or Facebook, but this is what press agencies have fundamentally been producing for 150 years, continuous news. So our job is not that as much threatened by the internet as other sectors. Of course, there are a number of pure players are seeing the cultural relationships between pure players and agencies more so than other areas of news that have emerged in the meantime. So the two extremes are now meeting, and what this means is that our products and productions need to follow the technological changes of our clients, simply delivering text, photos, or videos, but not being able to package these productions together with the technological content and being able to integrate all that on the various media. If you don't have that, you're going to suffer. Right now, our turnover from multimedia products is slightly less than 10%. But this is a sector that is growing, and we need to keep growing it. I was talking about the consumption of video, something which is essential now. If you want to bring value back to news, there's you need exclusives, distinctive news in written media, in photos also, but now you can't have any more headlines without pictures and videos mostly. For two reasons. This is the natural way people really approach news. You approach news through pictures, and you know that the advertising revenues generated on the web are mostly related to video consumption. Just one word about the AFP. For us, it was really pivotal to have a strong video presence, and here that was a chink in the armor for us. that was a sore lack in our offering. We had text, we had photo, we had infographics, but only 3 years ago we only produced 20 videos a day. Now we produce 200, so it was very important for us to catch up. Just a few figures that really illustrate the dynamics of each market, depending on types of production. Text at AFP has a turnover growth of about 1% per annum over the last 10 years. It's fairly stable production. And this growth accounts for 50% of sales. Text, 50% of sales, and it grows by 1% per annum and has done over the last 10 years. Within text, there are languages that are growing faster than others. We produce in 6 languages, and we can see that Arabic is growing very fast, Portuguese is also growing fast, as well as English. On the opposite side, French is not growing very strongly, neither is Spanish, and German is also fairly flat, which reflects the various market dynamics or geographical dynamics. Photo, 30% of our sales at the agency, and photography has been for a very long time the main growth driver for the agency, and the reason why we have 30% overall, but that's 30% of our sales overseas in photography. I talked about multimedia, about 10% of our turnover, and the remaining 10% is distributed between infographics and video. Here, we started from a very small relative share for video, but our growth, our turnover growth in 2012 last year was 25%, to be compared with 1% growth for text. You can see how the market is responding very strongly to that. And now you can't negotiate with traditional clients anymore in the print media without it ending with the number of videos we're able to produce every day or every month to really feed the news websites of major newspapers and magazines. So, image is really essential here. It's becoming absolutely central to future business models. This is what's going to drive traffic and generate advertising revenues. Now, the issue that comes next is whether we're going to be able to make consumers or readers or citizens pay for all that. Well, about that, I don't really have a clear-cut opinion about that. I know that there are long-winded debates between pure players or between press sites about paywalls and all such mechanisms. However, I don't think you can imagine that at some point someone's going to have to be compensated by readers for that. Everything free of charge at some point or another. This is going to have to go down. Not everything will be paid for, but maybe you'll have micropayments if technology allows it. You'll have much more customized situations depending on your fields of interest. However, simply sticking to models where no one pays directly for what they consume, that seems to me like something very complicated in the long term. But what will we have to provide to consumers? Well, news, of course, news as text and pictures, exclusive news, but also probably services, and services that are very closely related to news. And here, this is a major question. We're talking about fact-checking, data, possibly having investigations on demand. Well, we'll need to embed services in order to create a more interactive relationship than right now. Things are not very interactive right now. This is really the beginning of interactivity. You have an internet users reading something or watching something and then commenting. At some point, we'll need to have a customer relationship that's a bit richer than that, richer than simply reading and expressing your viewpoint about what you've just seen.
Donc la question des services, en tous les cas, est posée. Elle est posée aussi pour
This raises the question of service.
Est-ce que demain, la relation que nous avons
In the future,
avec nos clients est
the
une
relationship with our
relation
customers,
classique
will that be a traditional type of relationship?
Et unilatérale, hein. Je reporte le problème
And unilateral, one-sided, in other words, I go
tout à fait une, mais est-ce que
back
avec
up the
une
chain
télévision, une radio, un site internet,
a certain way. Now, radio and television, are we just suppliers of news? Do we feed our information into the computer systems of our customers? Or else, can we go further and come up with a platform involving our information flows, our news flows, that the customer would take, depending on the various number of issues, economic and editorial, and then also services, data, content, other information, targeted reporting. So a number of services would be attached to that. So that's a major strategic issue for us, and this has to do with the differentiation of vis-à-vis our competitors, focusing on sport or culture or other areas of our editorial activity through which we can stand out.
Ça, c'était la question pour faire remonter de la valeur à l'intérieur du flux d'information.
That's the issue of injecting more value into the information flow. Now, there's a following question.
La valeur est elle-même bien répartie dans
l'ensemble
de l'écosystème d'Internet?
Properly distributed within the Internet ecosystem?
Moi, je dis clairement non.
My answer to that is no, quite clearly.
Il n'est pas possible d'imaginer qu'il y ait à la fois une telle dévalorisation
there cannot be such a devaluation of information flows affecting so many players. It's very difficult to pay for content, and we can't see some internet players raking in huge amounts.
Peut-être pas la principale, mais en tous les cas une partie très importante se fait sur la base de flux d'informations produits par d'autres.
On the basis of the use of information supplied by others. You've got Google and others.
Je ne sais pas si la réponse actuelle, qui d'ailleurs
fall into that category. I don't know
la mise en œuvre aujourd'hui, en tout
whether
cas pour
the solution announced today, at least for France, is the right answer. But
que cette situation puisse encore durer
I don't think that situation can go on and on for years.
Est-ce que ce sera par le terrain de la fiscalité, par le terrain
I don't know whether we should bring a special tax regime or have specific agreements country by country. I think it would be very difficult
que la situation actuelle et que
to
le partage
think that the current situation with the current breakdown is actually sustainable.
Je ne dis pas ça pour
No, I'm not saying that
traiter le premier sujet,
to skirt the issue here, to dodge the issue. How do we put editorial value
de banalisation générale et de déflation
into this
voilà,
situation where there is economic devaluation, as it were?
Voilà les quelques éléments un petit peu.
These are some of the topics that I want to bring up with you, and I am, of course, available now if you would like to ask any questions. Microphone, please, sir. Microphone, please.
Est en contrat avec Google, est un partenaire qui vous verse de l'argent.
Oui.
Combien?
The interpreters are not receiving any sound from the hand mic. Well, indeed, business secrets do exist. I can't give amounts pertaining to any contracts that we have with our customers. The AFP.
C'est-à-dire qu'on a fait payer Google.
Well, perhaps indeed, Google is being made to pay. When our dispatches are broadcast by Google, then we get paid for that.
D'une certaine manière, voilà, c'est un contre-exemple qui est un bon exemple.
And that's a good, let's say, counter-example. Microphone, please. Could the technicians please be asked to switch this microphone on?
La réflexion aujourd'hui. Doit-on continuer à être un intermédiaire dans l'information, être dans une logique B2B et continuer, comme c'est l'histoire et l'ADN de l'AFP, de livrer des journaux, ou doit-on s'adresser directement au consommateur final, à l'internaute
The question roughly is, should we still be middlemen, or should we go B2B, or what? I don't know where the AFP stands now. Perhaps there are different market situations. Well, indeed, when I came, I was asked about the presence of AFP on the internet.
Il me semblait assez, comment dire, intellectuellement
I think that intellectually,
étrange.
It was quite strange that one of the main news agencies in the world should be absent from the internet. We've got a so-called corporate site.
Et alors même que nos concurrents, AP, Reuters, mais si vous regardez,
you've got AFP, you've got AP, you've got Reuters, you've got other press agencies, Italian and others, many other press agencies. They've been able to develop an internet site with a sharing of their output, that's for sale, and then other information provided free of charge. It's, let's say, lighter information. There was a French issue, but that had to be distinguished from the world in general. There was no question as regards our market share and our notoriety in France. However, the subject.
À l'inverse, en France, on a un sujet qui est d'expliquer ce qu'on fait.
Well, I mean, in France, we explain what we do. We are fairly well known, but as regards other countries, then indeed there are parts of the world where our notoriety is lacking. So the social networks are helping us fill that gap, and we have to prepare a more aggressive business strategy. We've got Spanish, English, and French language Facebook page. We've got Twitter as well in France. We've got more than 180,000 followers. We topped that figure just a couple of days ago. We have different editorial policies. What Reuters does, what we do on our thread in English, then we tweet part of our alerts. But what we And we don't do that on the French thread. However, the French have a policy which is quite virtuous in that we aim our tweets at the sites of our customers when they take our dispatches. So we are exposed as AFP, and at the same time we see traffic with our customers that way. And today we struck a balance, which was somewhat questioned by press editors and publishers before, but now it seems to be well accepted.
La question est après maintenant de savoir si on est capable de le décliner dans les autres langues de l'agence.
The question now is whether we can do that in the other languages that AFP uses. It's a question of organization, perhaps.
Mais incontestablement, ça y est, on est présent sur Internet.
We are now on the Internet, definitely.
Et je peux dire aussi que le site afp.com a été
AFP.com site has been totally reworked. We mentioned the blogs of journalists and journalistically and editorially, we were, say, parts of AFP were involved in that. Now, some publishers said, well, okay, we're interested in this story, but it's not in the thread. Can we use the story? And we, of course, we said, yes, you can use it. So we've produced for AFP, but some things that aren't in the stream can still be taken on board. So we have to distinguish between what's provided free of charge and what has to be paid for. But indeed, the idea is to work on our notoriety. So, of course, French editors want to gain market share abroad. So yes, I believe there's a question right at the front here. And if you are not familiar with AFP blogs on the AFP site, then go there. You'll see photographs covering all current affairs, and it's very, very enlightening. So, could you tell us who you are? My name is Barthélemy Kwame from Actual World in Abidjan, the Ivory Coast. I also work with Fraternité Matin. Now, a question as regards AFP's income. You gave us percentages, but you didn't give us actual figures. In Abidjan, when we deal with AFP, we say it's a pro-government agency. Perhaps you can correct me if I'm mistaken. Does the AFP get any grants, or do you earn enough income to cover your costs? And how many people work for AFP? Answer: AFP has 1,500 journalists, and our turnover figure is 280 million. It's 180 million, and then we have 118 million. Sorry, and then 40%. Therefore, now as regards press agencies, well, the three main agencies are roughly the same, because the idea is to have a network. And so if you want to be worldwide, then you have to have the same number of co-workers in the world. AP and Reuters have slightly more people than we do, because they cover the US far more than we do. They're more involved in the United States than we are. Now, Reuters, parent company, refinances the agency part of their system, and that's the same as what we get from the French government. AFP ran into financial difficulties, and this was recapitalized before, and we're a cooperative, and we are refinanced by American press editors. AP, well, AFP is 55%, has 55% of its turnover abroad, whereas that's 20% for AP. So in the past, our government did fund our agency because it wanted to give a foundation to a worldwide press agency based in France, but that was very difficult because the costs were as high as those of our competitors, but we didn't have a domestic market big enough to support that. So therefore, the government was involved. I don't want to go into detail because it's not of all that much interest today. The rules, in fact, under which we operate to go back to 1957, not the amounts. Now, since then, we've had the single market in Brussels, and the issue of public grants is seen very differently now. Like a case that's being studied now by the European Commission. Everything is being reworked to bring the system up to the standards of Brussels and the single market. So I've been quite long-winded on this, but it is very technical. As to the editorial line, our journalists, quite rightly, are independent. That's their responsibility, of course. And I feel very comfortable with that, because if you've got 4,000 customers throughout the world and you're in permanent competition with AP and Reuters, then indeed the customers will not want to buy something from France, as it were. In fact, what our customers want is world news in keeping with their editorial line. So therefore, we're still in the ring, as it were. We're still up there fighting. It's because the information we produce is credible and reliable. And if that weren't the case, then we wouldn't be reaching our current performance levels. Fine. Well, yes, a question here, another question down the front here.
Ouais, alors deux, et ensuite ce sera monsieur derrière. Pierre.
Yes, two here, and then one further back. Pierre, could you keep your question short, please? Good morning. B2B and B2C, the movement between the two. I mean, won't you have to change into a public-oriented media or medium? I mean, you mentioned Twitter, and because you couldn't keep the same status as an intermediary, as Philippe said. And so, I mean, perhaps you need to settle some things, in fact, before you can go ahead. Fine, okay. And then there are some questions at the back of the room, and then I'd ask you to keep your answers short as well. My name is Murad Wahi. I head an Algerian radio station. As regards the first question concerning the AFP and the coverage of conflicts in different parts of the world. In our coverage, well, we have issues as regards France on the international scene. We're not questioning the work of your journalists or your credibility, but as regards foreign affairs, or the position of France abroad, say Tunisia at the beginning of the Arab Spring, and then you have Libya and Syria. Ours is a young people's radio station, and there are questions as regards your coverage of these issues. You are credible, but we also rely on bloggers and social networks and bloggers from the various countries who do supply us with information. That enables us to cross-check our information and news. It's not that AFP is the voice of France, but that does have to do with part of the work that you do. But we're here today to have a look at the media and social networks. And so aren't you in competition with those networks when it comes to covering that type of conflict? Well, no, the AFP. And it would be strange if we were to say that we were the only source of information and news. I mean, this is a modern world, and indeed there are many sources of information, not just one. Now, as to France's position that you mentioned, we have 80 nationalities represented in our newsroom, and they work in 6 languages, and so there is a debate going on in-house, the same as outside of AFP. We have one of the most international newsrooms. We have Tunisians, Moroccans, Algerians working in Arabic as well as in French. Now, well, that you should need other sources to do your work, that's a good thing. I mean, in AFP, we think that there should be at least 2 sources of information. Anyway, if you've got 10 sources of information, all the better. Now, you can go a little bit further. As regards all this in Twitter, we're developing tools so that we can work out the strengths and weaknesses of information so that I can supply information to, say, favoured customers, but also that we can have tools which enable our journalists to browse through this enormous amount of information on the social networks. The only agency that has not left Syria over the last 2 years is the AFP. And we bring out pictures and videos from Syria that we put into our thread. And for many press media, then that's a required step, because before we disseminate this information, then we check the sources that might be somewhat questionable as regards their credibility. So there are different sources. Well, I don't see that as a source of competition. I mean, for our journalists, they use the social networks as well as part of their sources, and the social networks are part of the whole pattern of any decent journalist, using different techniques, of course. Now, I don't think that there is any newsroom anywhere in the world that could develop an editorial policy other than on the collection of information from social networks. So you need both sides of it. Yes, could you answer Pierre's questions? I mean, won't you be forced to go to the general public market? Well, it's a question of balance. If we were on the internet, I mean, basically for the French press, the turnover figure is 80 million euros. Could we go from year N to year N plus 1 by doing without, say, 80 million and generating, therefore, 80 million on the internet? Maybe not. So we have to distinguish the question as regards notoriety and our presence as an address for information and news. We have to be recognized as being able to gain and gather news journalistically. I think that we're trying to bring both sides of the conundrum together, but competition now is far stronger, and the situation is not the same as in the past, and so the strategy has to be different. Well, thank you, Emmanuel Hoog, for having shared your vision of the media market and its development. Could you give Emmanuel a round of applause, please?